We never reached the gardens. Because the world around us changed. That chilling sentence would echo through history, the testimony of two respected academics who, by all accounts, were not prone to fantasy. But what they experienced on that warm afternoon in Versailles would become one of the most unnerving and enduring time-slip cases ever recorded. It began innocently enough. On August 10, 1901, Charlotte Anne Moberly, the daughter of a former Bishop of Salisbury, and Eleanor Jourdain, Vice Principal of St. Hugh's College, Oxford, set out on a casual excursion to the sprawling Palace of Versailles in France. Both women were well-traveled, well-read, and scientifically minded, hardly the type to entertain notions of the paranormal. Yet what they encountered that day would shatter their understanding of reality itself. Their visit started like any other tourists, wandering through the grand palace halls, admiring the opulent art and gilded decor. But when they ventured into the extensive gardens behind the palace, something peculiar began to happen. "We lost our way," Moberly would later write. The women found themselves inexplicably disoriented among familiar paths. The bustling energy of the palace grounds seemed to evaporate. In its place, an eerie stillness. They noticed figures around them, but they weren't modern visitors. The men wore old-fashioned green coats trimmed with gold, and tricorn hats. The women were clad in elaborate 18th century gowns. The air itself felt charged, heavy, as if they had crossed an unseen boundary. Jourdain described the sensation as walking into a dream. Colors dulled, shadows deepened, a strange unease settled over them both. Then came the man on the terrace. Leaning against a stone balustrade was a sinister-looking figure with a pockmarked face, glaring at them. His appearance was so unsettling that Moberly instinctively looked away, fighting an overwhelming sense of dread. The two women pressed on, desperate to find their bearings. That's when they encountered a young woman seated beneath a tree, sketching. Dressed in an elaborate gown with a wide-brimmed hat, she seemed frozen in time. The woman glanced up briefly, her expression blank, her presence uncanny. They later described her as having the appearance of a wax figure more than a living person. Moments later, the spell broke, abruptly, as if a veil had been lifted. Sounds returned. The gardens buzzed once more with the voices of modern visitors. The old-fashioned figures had vanished. Shaken, the women returned to their lodgings, struggling to process what had happened. Days turned into weeks, yet the experience haunted them. Neither could shake the sensation that they had somehow slipped, momentarily, into another time. Determined to make sense of it, they embarked on exhaustive historical research. Astonishingly, they uncovered details that seemed to corroborate their strange encounter. References to specific people, garments, and locations accurate to the period of the late 1700s, including the Petit Trianon gardens where Marie Antoinette herself had once strolled. But if their account was true, how could such a thing be possible? Were they victims of a shared hallucination? Did they unknowingly traverse a tear in the fabric of time? Or was something far darker at play within the grounds of Versailles? They weren't prepared for what would happen next. Because soon, their story would ignite a firestorm of controversy, and draw the attention of forces determined to silence them. They told us to forget it, to let it go, but the truth refused to be buried. In the days following their eerie experience, Charlotte Moberly and Eleanor Jourdain became consumed by a single question: had they truly witnessed the past? Or had their minds deceived them in some unfathomable way? Back in England, the two women could not let it rest. Night after night, they pored over old maps of Versailles, cross-referenced 18th century portraits, and devoured records of court life under Louis XVI. What they found sent fresh chills down their spines. The stone balustrade where they had seen the pockmarked man matched an 18th century terrace long since altered in the modern gardens. The strange garments worn by the figures they had passed were not costumes. They matched authentic court attire from the reign of Marie Antoinette. And the woman beneath the tree, in a chilling twist, they discovered a 1789 painting of the Queen in precisely that setting, the Petit Trianon Gardens, wearing the very same style of dress and hat they had described. They had, it seemed, seen the doomed Queen herself. This was no passing curiosity anymore. The women began to believe they had stepped, impossibly, through a crack in time. But as word of their research quietly spread among their academic peers, they were met with something unexpected: resistance. A colleague warned them to abandon the investigation. A veiled threat followed: such claims will bring nothing but ruin upon your reputations. Yet the women pressed on. In 1911, a full decade after the event, they anonymously published an adventure, a detailed account of their experience under the pseudonyms Elizabeth Morrison and Francis Lamont. They believed that by shielding their identities, they might avoid academic scandal. They were wrong. The book became a sensation. Within months, their secret identities were exposed. The public was riveted. Time travel, ghosts, psychic echoes. The theories swirled in a feverish storm. But so too did skepticism. Critics accused them of fabricating the tale. Others suggested they had wandered into a historical reenactment, though none had been scheduled that day, and no costumed actors could be traced. Some called it mass hysteria or a shared delusion. But it was the most chilling accusation that shook them to their core. A mysterious letter arrived at Jourdain's residence. It read, "You have spoken of what was not meant to be seen. The past guards its secrets. Beware." The letter was unsigned, its origin unknown. Terrified but unyielding, the women doubled down, launching a second investigation. This time they sought to find other witnesses, anyone who might have experienced a similar phenomenon in the Versailles Gardens. And soon, to their astonishment, others began to come forward. Visitors who had reported inexplicable shifts in atmosphere. Tourists who had glimpsed figures in outdated dress before the vision dissolved. One witness even described a sudden coldness, followed by a fleeting encounter with a group of solemn, pale-faced courtiers. The evidence was mounting, but so too was the danger. Rumors spread of unseen forces within Versailles determined to protect the mysteries of its haunted grounds. And as Moberly and Jourdain pushed deeper into the enigma, they would soon stumble upon a discovery far more terrifying than they could have imagined. An ancient ritual said to anchor the echoes of the past, and a sinister warning of what happens to those who disturb it. There are places where time holds its breath, and those who dare disturb it risk being swallowed whole. By the autumn of 1912, Charlotte Moberly and Eleanor Jourdain were caught in a maelstrom of controversy. Their book and adventure had made them both infamous and targets of scorn within academic circles. Yet the strange letters, the anonymous warnings, and the growing number of eerie testimonies only fueled their obsession. Determined to confront the mystery head-on, they resolved to return to Versailles. But this time, they would not go alone. They enlisted a small, discreet circle of fellow researchers, trusted academics, sympathetic to their cause but wary of public ridicule. Under the cover of a scholarly, historical tour, they traveled once more to the Grand Palace in November of that year. What they sought was not in the gilded halls of Louis XIV. It was buried beneath the formal gardens, in a lesser-known section of the Petit Trianon, a secluded grove rumored to have hosted secret ceremonies of the Ancien Regime. A little-known 18th-century journal, unearthed by Jourdain during her research, had hinted at it. A circle of stone, where members of the Queen's inner circle had once gathered for rites of remembrance, an esoteric practice believed to preserve the essence of time through ritual. If the journal was accurate, it might explain the strange time distortions others had reported. On a fog-shrouded morning, the group entered the grove. The air was unnaturally still. Birds fell silent. The ground seemed to pulse beneath their feet. And there it was, a half-buried ring of weathered stones, scarcely visible beneath layers of moss and fallen leaves. Some bore faint, eroded carvings, astrological symbols, or so it seemed. In the journal's cryptic French, "Here, time's river bends. Moberly and Jourdain approached the ring cautiously. They reported a sudden drop in temperature. One witness claimed the sunlight dimmed, though no clouds had passed overhead. And then, a voice. Faint, feminine, singing in a language none could quite place. It drifted through the grove like smoke. The group froze. A researcher later described it as the sound of memory itself. Ancient, mournful, and unfathomably sad. No source for the voice was ever found. Before they could investigate further, an abrupt sensation gripped them, a kind of temporal vertigo. The grove seemed to shimmer, the stones appearing both ancient and newly placed in the same moment. Fear overtook caution. The group fled. Later, when they attempted to locate the grove again, it had vanished. Subsequent visits found no trace of the stone ring. The terrain itself appeared subtly altered, as if the land had reasserted its original form. Yet the experience left Moberly and Jourdain deeply shaken. Had they stumbled upon a ritual site designed to tether moments of the past to the present? Had the echoes they witnessed been fragments of memory, held in place by forgotten rites? Or was something even darker at work, a force that manipulated time itself within the palace grounds? One thing was certain. The Palace of Versailles was no ordinary monument. And the forces guarding its secrets were not yet done with them. Because what came next would cross the boundary from eerie into terrifying, and force them to confront a truth more disturbing than they had ever imagined. We were no longer sure if we had disturbed something, or if something had begun to follow us. In the weeks after their harrowing return from the vanished grove, both Charlotte Moberly and Eleanor Jourdain began to notice subtle but chilling changes in their lives. At first, it was small things. Objects in their homes would be inexplicably out of place. Clocks would stop at strange times, often precisely at 4:32 p.m., the hour they had first entered the grove. Faint strains of that same mournful voice would echo through their minds at night, leaving them sleepless and unsettled. But soon, the disturbances grew bolder. During a lecture at Oxford, Jourdain caught sight of a figure standing at the back of the hall, a pale woman in an 18th-century gown and wide-brimmed hat, her face obscured by shadow. When Jourdain blinked, the figure was gone. Later, Moberly experienced a similar vision. Crossing a London street at dusk, she spotted the same pockmarked man they had seen on the terrace at Versailles. He stared at her coldly, then vanished into the crowd. Were these hallucinations born of obsession, or had their encounter with the grove marked them in some terrible way? Terrified yet compelled to understand, they consulted an expert in the esoteric, a reclusive scholar named Dr. Armand Duval, known for his controversial work on temporal phenomena and the haunting of memory. Duval listened carefully to their account. When they finished, he said only this: "You have walked in a place where the past bleeds into the present. Such places remember, and sometimes, they remember you." He explained that certain locations, particularly those charged with intense human emotion, like the Gardens of Versailles, could act as reservoirs of psychic energy. Rituals, tragedy, and the weight of history could create a kind of echo, a loop in time. And those who became attuned to such loops might thereafter perceive fragments of them, or worse, draw their attention. Duval warned them that lingering near the source, or continuing their investigation, might deepen the bond. The phenomenon, he claimed, was not unlike a living thing. It could feed on curiosity, drawing its victims further into its snare. But by then, it was too late. The visions intensified. Both women began to experience episodes of lost time, finding themselves in unfamiliar streets with no memory of how they'd arrived. Friends reported their moods growing erratic, their conversations increasingly haunted by strange references to court life and forgotten rituals. Moberly, in a letter to Jourdain, wrote, "I fear we are slipping, that the edges of our world are fraying." Yet despite their fear, they could not resist the pull of the mystery. The possibility that they had glimpsed, or even crossed into, another time consumed them. But the final revelation would not come through books or scholars. It would come in the form of an ancient document. One that would lead them back to Versailles for a final confrontation, and force them to face a truth more terrifying than either of them had dared to imagine. The document was never meant to be found, and certainly never meant to be read. It arrived without warning, wrapped in faded oilskin and sealed with a brittle red wax. There was no return address, only a single line scrawled in elegant, slanted French across the parchment. Pour celles qui cherchent la vérité. For those who seek the truth. Inside was a manuscript, yellowed with age, its ink faded but legible. It was titled, Les rites du souvenir éternel, the rites of eternal remembrance. Charlotte Moberly and Eleanor Jourdain sat together in Jourdain's sitting room, the evening dark beyond the frosted window panes. As they carefully translated the archaic French, a terrible picture began to emerge. The manuscript was no mere historical record. It was a ritual guide, a forbidden text once possessed by a secret society within the royal court of Louis XVI. According to its passages, certain members of the Queen's inner circle had practiced rites designed to preserve fragments of memory and emotion within the grounds of Versailles. The goal was not immortality of the body, but of the moment. A way to defy the flow of time, allowing the echoes of the past to be replayed, endlessly, within specially prepared locations. The manuscript described circles of stone, charged through astrological alignment and human intent, where the veil between years grows thin. It also carried dire warnings. Those who witness the preserved shall be marked. The past, once stirred, will not easily release its hold. Suddenly, so much made sense. The eerie shifts in atmosphere, the frozen figures, the vanishing grove. They had stumbled upon one of these preserved sites, perhaps reactivated by their very presence. But a darker question remained: who had sent them the manuscript, and why? Determined to confront the mystery once and for all, the women prepared for one final journey to Versailles. This time, they were armed with knowledge, and a grim understanding of the risks. In late January 1913, beneath a steel-grey sky, Moberly and Jourdain returned to the palace. The gardens were nearly deserted. Snow clung to skeletal branches. They moved deliberately, guided by notes from the manuscript. The grove had seemingly vanished months before, yet both women felt a magnetic pull toward the Petit Trianon. There, beneath a drift of dead leaves, they found it, the edge of a half-buried stone. Heart-pounding, they cleared the ground. The circle was still there, dormant, but intact. Jourdain, trembling, read aloud a passage from the manuscript meant to sever the connection between past and present. As she spoke, the air grew charged, a low hum vibrating through the stones. Suddenly, the world seemed to warp. A wave of vertigo hit them both. For a brief, horrifying instant, Moberly swore she saw shadowy figures circling him, flickering images of courtiers long dead. And then, silence. The oppressive weight lifted. The grove faded to an ordinary patch of earth. They had broken the loop, or so they believed. But as they turned to leave, a final, dreadful sight awaited them. In the snow beyond the trees stood a single figure, the young woman in the wide-brimmed hat, face now visible, and unmistakably identical to the portrait of Marie Antoinette they had once seen. She gazed at them with eyes filled with ancient sorrow, and then slowly vanished into the cold air. Shaken to their core, Moberly and Jourdain fled Versailles, never to return. Yet the past, once touched, leaves its mark, and neither woman would escape the final price of their forbidden knowledge. We left Versailles behind, but Versailles never left us. In the months following their final visit, Charlotte Moberly and Eleanor Jourdain were plagued by an unshakable sense of unease. Though they had performed the severance ritual, some invisible tether still seemed to bind them to that impossible afternoon in the gardens of Versailles. The visions did not stop. Jourdain began experiencing vivid dreams of the French court, scenes too detailed, too emotionally charged to be mere invention. She awoke night after night to the sound of ghostly harpsichord music drifting through her home. Moberly, once a steadfast rationalist, found herself questioning her very grip on reality. On several occasions, she claimed to have caught glimpses of the young queen's mournful eyes reflected in her mirror, eyes that seemed to follow her, even after she turned away. Their colleagues whispered of the growing eccentricities. Students at St. Hugh's reported strange occurrences, icy drafts in locked rooms, books vanishing from shelves, fleeting shadows that seemed to linger just out of sight. Worst of all was the unrelenting feeling of being watched. Both women spoke of an oppressive presence that clung to them. A sense that unseen eyes observed their every move. Moberly confessed in her diary, "It is as though we are subjects in a play that refuses to end, the audience unseen, the script unwritten." Despite the growing toll on their health and reputations, they refused to recant their account. To them, the experience remained the most profound, and most terrifying, event of their lives. In 1924, after years of relentless anxiety, Eleanor Jourdain passed away suddenly under mysterious circumstances. Friends noted that in the weeks before her death, she had grown increasingly withdrawn, haunted by an unnamed dread. Charlotte Moberly would outlive her friend by over a decade, but she, too, remained convinced that they had not simply imagined the events at Versailles. In her final writings, she made a chilling admission: "Time is not the linear path we believe it to be. There are folds, fractures, places where moments become trapped, looping endlessly. We stumbled into such a place, and in doing so, became forever a part of it." Today, skeptics continue to debate the veracity of their story. Some dismiss it as a shared hallucination, others as an elaborate fabrication. Yet no convincing evidence has ever disproven their account, and in the shadowed corners of Versailles, whispers persist. Modern visitors still report inexplicable sensations, sudden cold spots, disorientation, and fleeting glimpses of figures in antique dress. Some even speak of a young woman beneath a tree, her sorrowful gaze meeting theirs before she fades like mist. The manuscript, now locked in a private collection, has not been seen publicly in decades. But those who have dared to read its final passage claim it contains one last, haunting warning. Those who awaken the echoes of time must be prepared to hear them for eternity. And so the mystery endures. A chilling testament to the thin veil between past and present. A veil that, in the gardens of Versailles, may never fully close.